Welcome, everybody, to the Metanoia Maria and the Broken Clock Tower Tavern. I have with me today Dr. Time. Hello and welcome.
Greetings and salutations. It's a pleasure to be here.
For those that didn't catch your introduction on the other live stream, please introduce yourself.
I'm Dr. Thyme. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are in the world today, you'll find me in the new way, or the way new way, or the new way, or whatever we happen to be calling it this week. But I can be found on a new YouTube channel, an old Discord station, and very many other places, including minds.com. I tend to be a strange dude. I am trained as a scientist, have a doctorate in chemistry, but I don't believe in the scientism of the world anymore. So we're sort of all out there on the cutting edge, cutting at the edge. Thanks, Grim.
Scientism of the New World. Looks like we're going to need savings throw, everybody. In case you don't know how those work, you get to pick between survival, social, wisdom, and heart. If it's over 10, you take half damage from the mind control. Me and this cat are going to spew at you. And if it's under 10, you'll take full damage. What was that, Lenny?
I'll choose wisdom today.
Good luck. We have we have that's a 2 for the survivalists, and then that one where bonuses do not apply for the socialists. You can get bonuses by commenting and such. Wisdom folks doing okay with the disciple 12, and hard folks, that's a 6 for you. Hope you got your bonuses. Indigo folks, sensate again. Sensate. So, saves given. Let's lay it on them.
Okay, we got
Tell me
it.
about time and maybe phonetics.
Time is an interesting thing, and I think that our scientific community has specifically befuddled people by getting it wrong. It flows in streams in multi directions and takes tangents at time, but we jump timelines all the time, but can't tell because they're all normalized to this human scale.
Normalized to the human scale. Say more about normalization and the human scale.
Okay, the normal human has a lifetime of 80 years. And so the 24-hour day, the 7-day week, the 364-day year are all constants wherever humans are. But humans appear on lots of different scales, not just this scale. And my guess is that the more important work that the human is doing, the longer lived time scale, which means they have their 80 years in, say, 1,000 years or 26,000 years or a million years. Whereas most normies and people who aren't quite awake will have their entire lifetime, 80 years, happen in a millisecond or a microsecond or even a smaller bit of time. But the narrative remains the same in all those, but the details differ. And so, evidence that the details are differing is something we have called the Mandela effect.
Well, the Mandela effect, for example, is supposedly a lot of us remember hearing that the fella died, and then we find ourselves in a timeline where the fella has not died, despite still having a memory of his funeral announcements and or whatever. What impacts? What's the difference between like it's all if it's the same narrative and the details change? At what level? What's a detail and what's something crucial to the narrative that can't change?
Uh, Something crucial to the narrative that can't change. Adolf Hitler can't decide not to start World War II. It's
Couldn't
embedded in the history. It has to be part of the narrative. On the
Does
other
it have
hand,
to
you
be
can have
him?
a hyphen in a Kit Kat.
Does it have to be him?
No, no, people who are fixed and have a purpose in the narradigm, the paradigm of the narrative, they don't have free will like you or I do. But when I choose to do something in my own free will, I start a second timeline where I made the opposite choice. And a lot of times these timelines will merge back because the decision had no bearing. But if I take a tangent and go off in a direction that doesn't follow the narrative, I might have my consciousness in a timeline that looks like this narrative, but is actually cutting edge of a new narrative. And I believe that people who go back in time cannot get back to the narrative that they were actually on at the time they left because they changed something in the past significantly that creates a different fixed timeline.
Let's let's take nuclear weaponry for example.
Okay.
I am under the impression I believe in one where that's a big LARP and that they were just fire bombs and not actually nukes, and that the reason Japan surrendered was because Russia broke treaty and crossed the border, not because of the weaponry that was unleashed on their cities. Could someone who exists in a timeline where nukes are not a fiction share this timeline with me?
Yes. The fact that we are apparently in the same narrative right now does not fix us on the same timeline because our persona is on multiple timelines. It's our consciousness that matters, but there's nothing that says that our consciousness has to be on the same timeline either. So, somebody who's on a long lived timeline doing significant work can actually change the narrative. And I think that's where we are at this point is that we're stuck in a time loop until one of us can kick us out of the current narrative.
How do we understand what the current narrative is and the transition to a different one?
I don't think we have the perspective from this consciousness to be able to tell that, but I do believe that this consciousness is sort of like a meat popsicle, as Bruce Willis in The Fifth Element called it. Um, our consciousness lives on even though our persona doesn't. But I've had several near death experiences that I consider to be true death experiences, but woke up in roughly the same place in the same narrative.
So, like, the you that was experiencing the timeline with the death in it shifted to one where the death didn't happen.
Yes. And after the truck would have plowed into my car, me and my passenger were sitting in the front seat of the car at the top of the hill saying, "What the heck just happened?" I've also had an experience where I was taken off of this timeline by somebody who came onto my timeline at the time and handed me some papers. And the papers had to do with the Reform Party, Ross Perot's 1990s.
Can I
Uh,
finish? Can I finish? That's all I remember about Ross Perot is the debate with Al Gore, where he was like, "Can I finish? Can I finish?"
yeah. And Ross actually collected 21% of the vote in 1992. And what that ended up doing was establishing a political party in the state of Oregon. And we called it the American Party. And for 3 years, we ran candidates for governor and local legislatures. And then in 1996, we started getting behind a candidate, Dick Lamb, who was the governor of Colorado, because Ross said he didn't want to run. And then suddenly Ross wanted to run, and we got strong armed to be part of the Reform Party instead of the American Party. And then a gentleman named Pat Buchanan came around, quit the Republican Party, became a Reform Party person, started attacking Dick Lamb, and brought in all sorts of nice, dirty tricks. And it turned out that Ross won the party election. And this time he got about 2% of the general vote rather than 21%. And we kept the party going for another 6 years and ran local candidates, but it was pretty much over when ego took over for merit.
When did the papers and the timeline thing happen in that span?
Sometime in, it would have been 2006, maybe 2005. And the person who showed up on my property handed me the papers, and half the papers were true to what I knew about the Reform Party from being an insider and a delegate from the state of Oregon, and half the stuff was just complete BS.
Of what
And
nature was the BS?
stories about people that didn't happen on the timeline that I was on.
Like smears or just stories?
Some were smears, some were different narratives within the same paradigm.
For example?
Um, they were talking about a candidate who I didn't recognize the name and didn't know existed, who had run with Lamb and Perot and Buchanan back at the time in 96 when we were trying to find a way to get around Bill Clinton. But you see, the whole game is rigged. So at the time, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it
Now,
took me a minute too.
yeah, now there's no problem at all in understanding some of what happened. But later on that day, after I had received the papers, I was picked up by cops on my property and invited to sit in the back seat of the car. And they drove me to the hospital where I had been earlier in the day for a sanity check. And they left me there. So I got to spend about a week in the Russians call it the sanitarium. We have some other names for it. But because I had been there once before from my college days, I sort of played the role that Jack Nicholson played in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and became a nice little thorn in their side until they got rid of me.
They do let you out if you bother them enough.
Yes, they do, especially when the other patients think you're a medical doctor and start listening to you instead of their medical doctors and nursing staff. It was all help enabled by a long-term patient who knew exactly how they ran things, and it turned out the color of people's socks and the colors of their t-shirt told the staff which hallway the person was supposed to be in. So if they were in the wrong hallway, it was immediately obvious because they were wearing different colored socks or a different colored t-shirt. And so what we ended up doing was having a sock and t-shirt exchange. And we actually reached the point where all the cool people were in one wing partying because even though you're in the bin, there's still access to every illicit and licit drug you can imagine. And all the normie, straight, really crazy people were in the other wing. And all the staff was in that wing because there were problems going on. And we partiers had about an hour and a half or 2 hours before it turned out that we had to turn it down. but the two wings were at right angles to each other, and one person positioned in the seat could see both wings at the same time. So after that manipulation, the head nurse sort of called me in and said, "You can't do things like that anymore.
No more trading socks, Lenny. No more
No more
trading
trading
socks.
socks."
How does this experience relate to the narrative
You'll have to
shift?
repeat that. I just had a bus go by.
I heard. How does the experience with the bin relate to being separated, pulled out of the narrative, and then placed in a different one?
Well, it turns out that the reason I ended up in the bin was a lot more complicated than just receiving the papers. It had to do with my mental status, which was really blown at the time because I was having problems with the misses, and I had believed the narrative pretty much as it was presented all through my education process. And it wasn't until after that I started questioning things. And about that time, I really got to questioning things and never, never took a job after that. Job stands for just over broke. And it's a good way that no matter how much you make at your employment, they keep you in line. So, in order to get some freedom of action, I just quit working for people, became a consultant. So I could always exchange personal services for the things that I needed, but I didn't have to use money for the most part. Grocery stores and gas stations being an exception because you they won't barter with you.
Yeah, for food. So you found yourself off of the narrative you had believed up until then, and what did you make of the one you were exploring?
Um it had a different time constant, but I had been out the previous couple weeks camping. And when I got home from camping on that day that I was picked up, I had control of my dogs mentally so that I had them walking in figure eight patterns. And I had a shower in which the temperature of the water changed that was reflective of a 48-hour period previously that happened in like a minute in the shower, where it got hot, then it got cold, then it got super hot, and then it got cold again. And I don't know, I started hanging out in nature instead of hanging out in constructed human life. And that gave me a complete different perspective of how things work and what was going on. So I've spent roughly the last 10 years as a hermit coming up with ideas of how things work. And sometime right before I met you and caught up with your channel, I came out of my hermit world and started once again doing things that the normies do, like spending money to get things that I wanted.
What nuggets of wisdom and or knowledge have you brought from your hermitage?
That nature doesn't work on the same counting system as humans work. We're taught to count one, two, three, four, five. Nature counts one, one, two, three, five, the Fibonacci sequence. And 5 steps into it, you're still at the number five. But whereas humans then count 6, 7, 8, nature counts 8, 13, 21. And so by the time we get to 8, nature has 21 different possibilities for us to work with. And we are not able to control the show, although some people think they control the show.
So how does that knowledge apply to anything I do in my life? Like, can I match the the rhythm better, or what's the implications of that?
I think you have to be exactly who you are, but if something different happens, like suddenly the virtually not alone slogan goes viral, and you suddenly end up making a huge amount of money because it all went viral, in another timeline, you won't have gone viral and you will still be the same grim Griz struggling along as you currently are. And those two timelines won't come back into convergence because you've changed your narrative.
What do I do for all those poor me's that aren't riding the wave of success?
You are not, they are not with your consciousness on their timeline. We would call them NPCs. So you appear in a lot of worlds as an NPC, just as in this world, we have a lot of people who have checked out and really aren't there because their consciousness is on a different timeline.
What's that mean for the consciousnesses on the timeline with those checked out folks?
It might make it tougher for us to operate, but it might make it easier also. It just depends. I no longer can accept the current status of what we have been taught. So by not believing it and ignoring it, I seem to have certain privileges that other people don't because I just go through my life, smile, and do whatever I want. And some people can manifest in really interesting ways. Like if you're short of food, but you know you're never going to be hungry, the same meal will appear in your refrigerator 3 days in a row. But I don't know that I don't know that we're not in the same time loop that Bill Murray was in Groundhog's Day, but by assigning days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, in consecutive order, we lock ourselves into the treadmill by not realizing that it's just the same day over and over.
It all seems like the same day sometimes. Like I might be in a different body, but the day itself seems exactly the same.
Yep, the weather might change, but the day itself is exactly the same. And we are pretty much creatures of routine. I get up in the morning, and the one of the first things I do is put up a pot of coffee, so that for the next 2 3 hours I can just go and refill my cup. But now that I have transferred from California to Florida, my routine is entirely different than it was, with one exception. I now go to bed at 11:30 at night, whereas on the West Coast, I went to bed at 8:30 at night. So my body knows when it wants to go to sleep, but the clock is different.
Tell me about the new way.
The new way, KNEWWEIGH, takes everything we thought we knew and weighs it again to see if it's still valid. And so in the past, I had the New Way radio show on Steampunk Radio that ran for 3 years, five days a week, 2 hours a day. And somewhere on the Steam blockchain, people can find those radio shows. But I don't know how to access a blockchain, and there doesn't seem to be any instruction videos on quite how to do that.
So, but the new way itself, what things have you reweighed under the new way, and what has come and not measured up, you could say?
The whole of science really doesn't measure up. The fact that there's math underpinning things called physics, chemistry, and biology is a construct that they've used to separate ideas and befuddle people by using the same word in different applications. A nucleus to me, is the center of an atom, and nuclear energy or nuclear bombs have to do with fusion or fission of that nucleus. However, the biologists call a nucleus something in the cell that operates the system for the cell, and it's an entirely different word with an entirely different meaning. So, I don't know.
How much they are the same is immediately brought to my mind. Like, like when it comes to cell division and reproduction and or just mating, how much that is like can be seen as the same sort of energy released in fusion or fission.
Now, in chemistry, the nucleus, when it changes, sheds off either an alpha, beta, or gamma particle, and that changes what the element actually is. Whereas in biology, when they have a nucleus, it's supposedly the brain of the cell. Although, to tell you the truth, I no longer believe the biologists even have a clue. I don't think the brain is responsible for our consciousness. I think it's the water.
I've always thought it was the same way antennas work. That, that our nervous system channels or receives our consciousness. But I could chalk it up to water pretty easy too.
You know, if you think about what a cell is and how many cells there are in the body, maybe the entire humanity narrative right now is from the perspective of humans on the nucleus inside a cell, and let's say a blood cell, and that similar same narratives happen in every other blood cell, and we just hop from blood cell to blood cell into different similar narratives until we take a tangent and blow the narrative apart.
Has that happened? And are you familiar with any previous explosions of narrative?
Yes, and I believe that we can see that in the concepts that we have of what we call time travel, in that somebody like H.G. Wells, who wrote The Time Machine, uh, had information that seems to have come from modern day that he could present back in the 1910s, 1920s. Jules Verne is another person. How did he get so close to the concept of rockets and submarines, writing from a perspective of before any of that was even conceived?
How much of his writing it shapes what manifested in the reality that followed?
I believe that's what we're dealing with, is that really this reality is a manifestation of the scientific novels of the early 19th century. But you see, they've cut out a lot of people that we should know something about: Walter Russell, Victor Schauberger, Royal Rife. We can keep giving names of people. There's one that people might know who no longer seems to be talked about, named Linus Pauling. And when people hear Linus Pauling, they don't realize how great a chemist Linus Pauling was. They just say, oh, he was a nutcase because he promoted vitamin C. That's
That
how they changed the narrative.
that's pretty up there. But the things like I question are like the fact that everybody in my high schooling was programmed with 1984, and how in the back of their minds, in their uncrystallized beliefs, in the dark shadows of their sub superconscious, that shapes those. It seems as though it's steered reality toward it with all that attention focused in those directions. Like our constant monitoring of Big Brother, even when the cameras are supposedly off.
Well, it's a brave new world, isn't it?
I haven't read that one, but I've watched the video synopsis.
I, the author I really like right now is having a grip on future reality is a gentleman named Neil Stevenson. He wrote Snow Crash in early 1990s. I think it was 93. But the book Snow Crash talked about the metaverse and described that and how it would work. And lo and behold, sometime in the last couple of years, Mark Zuckerface introduces the metaverse to everybody. Um, Fiction is definitely repeated in the narrative as the narrative progresses, but it's time for us to create a new narrative because this one doesn't work for most of us.
I agree with that. That's the paintball for Jesus story. um,
Well, how about uh, a brief break to brand and talk about Anarchino?
okay, I can. Ah, I can find this. Here's this one. I like this one a lot. All right, so Anarchino is once upon a time, these three fancy guys got together and decided they were going to have a talk in person on the stage and stuff. And they did it in Thunder Bay. And then they decided they were going to do it again in Chino, California. And since I couldn't go to the one in Thunder Bay because they had this thing where if you want to cross this line, you have to let somebody else stick their mRNA inside you. I didn't go to that one, but since this one is outside of that restriction, I decided to make it. And when I decided to go, it was like, the tickets are this much money, and and someone offered to incentivize my attendance. And in exchange for the incentive of the ticket being purchased, I was placed in charge of the camping lodging arrangements for the event, which meant that I would be camping for 5 days in California. And I thought, that's special too. And since I am, let's say, not as reverent as most of the rest of the event, I decided that the camping thing could be a gathering of the irreverent that has its own special function, and that's when camping for the Estuary Chino event became Anarchino 23.
Makes sense. That would be about 6 hour drive from where I was living in Etna, California, which is somewhere west of Mount Shasta. But I've recently relocated to Florida on a non fixed time schedule. And so if I'm on the east side of the country, I likely will not make it west to the event. But if I am on the west side of the country by that time, I will try my darndest to make it to the event.
I'm looking forward to it, and it may manifest that we caravan across the country, at least the western half of the country, to the event. So that might be another. I mean, what goodwill and people wanting to manifest together can pull off is kind of what we're seeing happening with Anarchino 23. We've got somebody that reserved or is at least discussing reserving a nearby RV slot so we can recharge our phones. Chad's supposed to be there. I've decided that we're going to form at least a 4-person band called the Signs and Wonders, so that so that everybody who's attending can say that they saw signs and wonders perform. Signs and wonders performed. It was great. It was great.
Make sure the group has a cowbell.
Ooh, that I definitely a cowbell, perhaps a tambourine as well. It's gonna be quite the affair. I hope. Um, and then we have also coming up, 13 months from now, there'll be an eclipse crossing over the United States, and it crosses the path of the last eclipse across the United States in a place called Bosque del, Illinois. And so I have every intention of being where the eclipse path crosses the last eclipse path in April of 24.
Yeah, I was less than 60 miles away from the path of the eclipse the last time, and a number of my good friends drove north to catch the path of the eclipse, but I didn't decide to go with them because of other things going on at the time.
Well, not every eclipse is for everyone.
That, and when you're a hermit, dealing with people, even if they're friendlies, is not something you actually want to intentionally do. There's enough time in unintentionally doing it. And our life is based on serendipity and possibility. So if you keep motivated by understanding that if your thoughts are good, good things will happen, you end up in the wilderness camping and have a friend you haven't seen from 12 years in the past wander into your campsite because he happened to be hunting nearby and was tired of not talking to people.
Serendies, synchronicities, and possibility vortexes. That seems to be the way that narradimes are navigated.
Yes, you get what you believe you're going to get, and so it's very important to remain positive and no matter what happens, not bring your blood pressure up because that causes really strange thinking.
We've seen that famously with Scott Adams recently. That
Yeah, the little Teddy just backed off everything he said when he was completely right in what he said, but had to kneel before the powers that be in order to keep his Dillhead character going.
uh, this is a this time between corporations and nations and this whole shift is quite the road to navigate. It's
I've given up believing in it. I'm now the grand poobah of my own world. And so anybody who says yabba dabba doo can join and be the grand poobah of their own world. And then we'll have a grand poobah meeting and decide who the grand poobah is.
well, I don't know that I can commit to saying yeah, but I would do enough. Otherwise, I would be in strict competition with you.
No, we're a cooperative competition, which means everybody does what's best for them, and we want what's best for you.
We want you to be able to better discern what's best for you because you're doing a piss poor job of it. Oh, wait.
Well, moving from California to Florida has improved the quality of the bagels.
I think that can be left right there, just like that. You're starting up a show on your YouTube channel. Is it a revivification of the steampunk radio thing, or is it a new beast entirely?
It's a new beast, but it's going to have ties to the old beast. I'm convinced that I have no clue as to what's going to happen in the narrative, but if I don't participate, it's going to happen anyway. So I might as well give it my best shot and participate. So I will be doing narrative monologues, The World According to Lenny, which is not the same world as other people believe in. And then I will be doing interviews with individuals, some from your channel, some from other channels that I have been in, a lot of people from Discord that I've met. And if we can figure out how to get the StreamYard working in a Discord room, it was great to work a radio show out of a Discord room. We could have up to 50 participants, but mentally, when I got from 21 to 34 and past the 34 number, I lost control of the show because I couldn't keep track of what was going on anymore with each of my guests, and some people started running away. And then something happened that told me it was time to shut the show down, and that was 3 or 4 months before COVID, which would have instantly shut the show down because I'm totally politically incorrect.
Yeah, there was.
This
I
YouTube channel might not last very long.
Yeah, I am. It's. I think part of the miracle that mine continues to exist is that it hasn't hit the 1,000 and gotten reviewed yet. But those times did give me a community strike for just some little clips I made once. And the channel operates under that strike forever now.
Really? I thought strikes expired after a certain time period.
Yes, but the first warning stays forever, and as a as a shroud over your channel and its views. I think. Do you have a time slot in mind for your
No,
new
no, it's
spiel?
going to be random, especially with the monologues, because anytime I find that I have time, I can easily go in and flip the switch. And once I end up paying for the service of SteamYard, I will have a lot more flexibility in just being able to go on air and run with it.
Part of what I'm trying to do with the Broken Clock Tower Discord and with the channel and that not is help people like you make the transition to these other platforms, and that the groups that meet online can migrate as needed, as silenced, perhaps. So, any help I can give you with getting that set up, I'd be happy to, and
Awesome. I will
look
take
forward
you
to it.
up on that. And I enjoy your channel very much. The characters who come in each have their own expressed opinion of how things go. And it seems like I Am Magic holds everything together as glue. So she's great.
It's good to have a heart in your chat, that's for sure. I think that one thing that I expect or hope from everybody who becomes involved is that um, we just accept that we're all in this. Whatever it is we're in it together, and that it seems to be that those that have become involved are at least able to hold that amount of goodwill for what's going on.
Yes, I find the number of diverse people from different religious beliefs that all seem to have the same general philosophy: be good to others and they should be good to you. Um, doesn't matter whether you call it Christianity, Judaism, Islam, or Scientism, it's all people being people. And it's much better to treat them nice with a smile on your face than yell at them and call them stupid fools.
Well, sometimes I need to be called a stupid fool, and I appreciate those that are willing to wear the disdain and be the ones that sometimes iron has to sharpen iron, and I could use a whetstone from time to time. So I appreciate those folks too.
Absolutely. And there's one of the things I've been thinking about is developing a panel so that I have maybe half a dozen to a dozen people who, when I conduct a one on one interview with somebody I don't know, after the interview is done, the panel can come on and ask specific questions of either the interviewee or me and flesh out how things work. I think one of the biggest problems we have now is linguistics, in that people use the same words to mean totally different things. And a word like community is a poisoned word in half the minds out there, because as soon as they hear community, they say, "Oh, we're not communist."
I don't see why communes don't work now that we have internet. But
It's
uh,
because those socialists have their own dye.
they do. They do. Anywhere else you want to take this, Lenny?
Not for now. I'm happy to talk with some of your other guests when you do things, and I'll have room to interview people in a different way, a new way, if they want to come aboard. But I have been especially impressed with the Friday Morning Nameless recently, because I too have been through a 12-step program and know exactly what he's talking about. The only problem is I don't give up my power. And step one is we recognize that we need to give up our power. And so that sort of blows the 12 steps out of the water when step one is a violation of sanity.
Well, I cheated and looked ahead, and there's one of the steps is making amends, and
Yes.
so I immediately knew that that wasn't a thing for me. But he's got a he sees things in a way that's real similar to me, where like all the programming I've been stuffed with over the time bubbles up to the surface. To it's like it's to me it feels like the right side of my brain is like dropping hints to what the rest of me hasn't figured out yet. But I think that game happens on his channel as well, and I appreciate that.
Well, water is polar, and it can flip from left handed to right handed if it is, depending on what it's bound to. And if my theory is correct that intelligence, consciousness, and all that is in the water, then that just makes the organic structure scaffolding and takes the concepts of biology and pitches them out with some of the other concepts that we've learned to pitch out. But until we can understand correct physics, we're not going to get anywhere in this paradigm, because they have blocked off the ability to get to where we were before just by not informing the people on how things work for long enough and changing the narrative frequently enough that you got to go back and read people like Walter Russell to get an idea of how electricity and magnetism work. Or you can go back to James Clerk Maxwell, who was 60 years before Walter Russell, but then was changed by several people, including Dirac and Heaviside. But there's all sorts of things that we are told that are scientifically proven. Like,
Studies show.
yeah, science. Anytime all scientists agree, you know they're wrong.
I find that true of almost any group. It's like once everybody's on board, then they must have something wrong. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to agree.
Well, it's interesting that the cutting edge is one where the people on the cutting edge are continually asked to make things up that sound logical based on what they already know. But the that foundation of what we already know is terribly skewed by the fact that some of it's blatantly wrong. So the new way is, once again, weighing things we thought we knew, seeing if they still hold, and if they don't, changing it to something that does work. Chemistry is a construct. It works because I can walk into a lab, mix chemicals, and get the product that I want. But to get there is quite a tortuous path. And the whole pharmaceutical industry is really applied chemistry, but applied by, shall we say, the forces of evil.
Well, evil might be a little bit far, but we can say a lot of it is led by misguided aims.
Okay, I will buy that intent of good and evil is a construct too, and that most people, when they do things, are looking at the immediate situation, coming up with the best result, and it isn't necessary that they even think of good and evil to get that result. It's only applied in retrospect.
Like the the consequences weren't when I came up with the solution. The impacts weren't fully understood, and I think that's true of this channel too. All
Yeah,
right, thanks, Lenny. Let's call this one your Fringe encounter, and hopefully, I'll be making an appearance on your stream soon.
I imagine so. Take
Uh,
care.
let me run the conclusion bit.
Okay, and branding.
Do you have anything you want to say in conclusion?
Yes, Mr. Peterson would be a great person to interview on this station. We'll have to arrange it.
I've seen it happen before, but it involves sigil magic, and I don't want to get involved. Thanks, everybody. This was me, and this was Lenny. See us around.